Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to chat to you today. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Huge congrats on this. I know it's your debut feature and you've already had such an incredible response to it. Maybe for people who haven't seen it yet, though, you can give us a brief intro to Big Boys. What can they expect when they come to watch the movie?
Yeah, so Big Boys is a coming of age comedy about a 14-year-old boy named Jamie who goes on a camping trip with his cousin who he loves and is really excited to see, but he's disappointed when he finds out that she's bringing her boyfriend because he really just wanted like cousin time. But soon he realizes like, oh, this guy's really cool. I kind of want to be his best friend. Oh, I think I might actually have a crush on this guy. So it's about this sort of moment of coming to terms with even like letting yourself have a crush on another guy to begin with and start to come to terms with your queer identity and wrestling with a lot of like the sort of internalized homophobia and all of that as you sort of like embark on like the beginning of your journey towards like accepting yourself as a gay person.
And yeah, as we said, it's your first feature. I understand it's a story very personal to you. I mean, was this something that you had been wanting to make a movie out of for a long time? Did you have a few different ideas you were ruminating on? How did it all come about?
Yeah, this is sort of like something that I had wanted to make a movie about for a long time. Honestly, since I was like the age of this character, because I was struggling with similar things of like having crushes on straight friends or older guys, or basically there was this feeling of sort of like this desire that couldn't go anywhere. And I was like seeing a lot of coming of age stories or just romance films and things like that, where of course it's like the two like leads always come together. And it just didn't match my experience because my experience was lonelier and more difficult. And I knew that that was a common thing for a lot of queer people growing up. And so I wanted to make a movie that sort of honored what it's like to go through that kind of moment in time where you have to figure out so much on your own and you can't really talk to people about it. And you can't have that sort of consummation, that like closure of like getting together with the person you want, but like you find closure in new ways and you grow in unexpected ways. So I really just wanted to make a film that was really all about that.
And in terms of maybe other films that we're using as sort of like references or touch points, because I think you can sort of see this as sitting between a few different genres, the coming of age story, but then you're kind of using this sort of comedy drama tone. But then you've also got the queer cinema where perhaps we sort of more focus on the coming of out stories or
Yeah.
more ones that have kind of a traumatic thread to them. So it sits somewhere between all those different things. Were there other films you were drawing upon, or did you also want to try and do something a bit different?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely cared about doing something that felt fresh to me, like an angle on it that I hadn't seen before, at least. But yeah, I mean, there were so many movies that were influences on this, like Eighth Grade, the Bo Burnham movie. That was huge. The show Pen 15 and the show Freaks and Geeks. I mean, all of those are movies and TV that like just really honor what like real teenagers sound like and are super well observed and like specific. And it's like they find humor in the way that people just naturally are, as opposed to sort of like piling like very written kind of jokes on top of it. It lacks that kind of artifice. And I just admired that so much. And so those were really like the North Stars for this movie.
Yeah. And also, did you mention Linklater's Boyhood, which I saw?
Oh yeah. I mean, Linklater's probably my favorite director, and so he's never far from my mind.
And it does feel like, yeah, perhaps when you can sometimes feel like when it's a coming out story, it can almost take itself too seriously. And so being able to sort of throw in those funny moments, those silly moments where things are going wrong, where you feel uncomfortable in your own skin, that feels so much more true to life than sometimes how Hollywood will sort of try to capture these things.
Yeah, yeah, that was the hope of like trying to show it as much as it actually was and also show that like that's enough. Like that's worth making a movie about.
And what about casting? Obviously, all your main characters, but your protagonist, because I mean, what an incredible performance. And it was really going to sort of like live or die by whoever you cast in that role. So was that like a broad casting that you did? How do you discover him?
Yeah, I mean, so Isaac Krasner, who plays Jamie the lead, um, is the center of the film. and is sort of like the engine through which the movie runs. And that was, you know, in a lot of ways, just a shot in the dark in terms of casting. Like, we just threw out a wide net. We looked for actors in like North America and in the UK, and we were just lucky enough that Isaac submitted a tape, and his tape was actually the first that we watched, and it was like pretty mind blowing and like clear from the very beginning that it just had to be him. That he just had such a nuanced understanding of the character and had such a sharp, like mature sense of humor, and was just so easy to empathize with. Like, he just invited you into his inner life in this really like captivating way. And so yeah, it was just like, oh yeah, he can absolutely carry this movie.
And how did you want, even with that character, I guess, to go against some of the stereotypes we might have about, the people we normally see in these movies? And, you're sort of pulling on lots of different threads about, what masculinity might mean in this day and age, about body image, and even in the interactions between him and Dan, we perhaps sort of overcome some of those, very sort of like well-trodden storylines or what we expect from certain characters on screen. And so we also wanting to work with him to play with some of that too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the movie is called Big Boys for a reason. Like, it's about a chubby kid who has a crush on a chubby guy. And that was something that was true to my experience and was something that I felt like I hadn't seen a lot on screen before. Because I think that, again, it sort of goes hand in hand with like presenting like the super glossy like version of this where all the characters look like sort of supermodels, and then the version of this that feels like a little bit more true to life. And also I've often been frustrated with how sort of like robbed of like desire and romance chubby characters are on screen, and how they're often relegated to like a sidekick position or like comedic relief. And I really wanted to see something that put them front and center in like a romance story. And so that was another big motivation behind making this movie to begin with.
And also kind of touching on these things about, bullying, and particularly when it can be from within a family. I feel like, maybe not enough airtime is given to that. Maybe we focus on, how it might be in school, for example, if you're not in like the cool group, but actually with siblings, with cousins, maybe it can almost be worse in a way because it's harder to escape from too, and how that might shape how someone feels about themselves or their self-esteem growing up, and it can be quite hard to tackle. So is that something important to put on screen too?
Yeah, it's, I think you put it really well, where it's like, it's something you can't escape from. Like, it's just in your own home. And so I think that makes it even more sort of like confusing and frustrating, especially if you also really love the person that it's coming from and also and do really get along with them. I mean, I wanted to make it clear to the audience that there is some warmth between Jamie and his older brother Will, who is the one who often bullies him, sometimes in very obvious ways and sometimes in more sort of like subtle, insidious ways. Um, but yeah, to show that there's like a real complex relationship there, and that ultimately Jamie threatens his older brother, but neither of them really understand that or can put like the words to it. So it's about also sort of just starting to sort through like, oh, what's really going on underneath here? Because, you know, they're 14 and 16 years old. Like, they're still developing like the emotional language to talk about that.
And the look and feel of the film, sort of says some of your influences, I guess, there at the beginning, but perhaps the way it looks too, because I love the fact that it's, in this kind of beautiful natural environment, and you're capturing, those really sort of tender moments on the lake, and kind of being a bit maybe sort of out of normal society, being in the woods. What does that allow you to sort of like, get a different perspective or share these different moments with people? So how important was the setting, and also how you captured it?
Yeah, I mean, that's really perceptive of you because that was totally the motivation. I remember talking to our DP Gus Bendinelli, and he was talking about how like how important it is to, just in terms of location scouting, find a spot that feels very sort of like secluded and private in a way, because Jamie is taking this journey away from home, and it does allow him this sort of like breath of fresh air, this new perspective, and also just like a sense of safety, not being at school or around his mom or anything like that, where he can start to sort of explore these parts of himself on his own terms. But also, I thought there was something just inherently funny and interesting about going through this kind of experience on a camping trip. You are stuck in a tent with your brother, and there's all these families nearby, and you're going through something very personal, like coming to terms with your sexuality, and like you're also very sort of exposed in a way. So I liked playing with both and throwing Jamie, some giving him a private moment and then sort of throwing him out into the open. And then yeah, I mean in terms of capturing that it's so much of that really is just our production designer Rachel Scott and our DP Gus Beninelli and the rest of the team who made do with like not very many resources, you know, like it was a small crew working out in the woods. And to this day, I'm just so happy with like the look that they found for this film. And I think it has like a warmth and a naturalism to it that is exactly what I hoped for.
And there are so many sort of, I love the balance basically of the really sort of comedic moments with the sort of tender emotional ones. I mean, were there some standout bits that you remember from the shoot, particularly working with Isaac and the rest of the young cast that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest highs of the shoot was when Isaac started dancing by the campfire. There's like a scene where the characters are like playing Taboo, a board game together, and then Jamie just gets like such a sugar high from the experience that he just like gets up and starts dancing. And you know, that game was like them playing the game was all improvised, and then Isaac's dancing was all improvised. And so it just had such a energy and like an electricity, and it you could see it really like galvanized the crew. Like people were cheering and dancing along behind the camera, and it just had a very sort of like warm, loving feeling to it on set. That was a moment that was so encouraging to me because I felt like I was watching what my dream of the movie was like unfolding in real time.
And the running gag as well with the hot dog. I felt like
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that was just too brilliant.
Oh, good. I'm glad you like that.
And was that something quite fun to have those like comedic moments in there too?
Yeah, I mean that, you know, I started by making comedy. Like that's always what I've been like primarily interested in, like making sketches and like comedy short films and all of that stuff. And so this in a way was like a departure for me, leaning into something that was more sort of emotional and dramatic, and just like earnest. But I knew that I wanted the movie to be really fun and as funny as possible. And so, yeah, it was very important to me to sneak in things like that.
Was it ever challenging actually being in the woods? I'm sort of picturing you actually all having to like be intense yourselves, you know, like the crew and stuff.
Thankfully, that wasn't the case. Like that would have been rough. um, we were staying in like a cluster of Airbnbs on the mountain, which was fun because it lent a sort of like summer camp atmosphere to the whole shoot. I think it helped people bond very quickly. And also just like going through the challenges of like being out there in the woods with the bugs and like you know like an occasional like lightning storm and like just we were really in it together.
And was it what you expected? I mean, you must have ideas in your mind about what it will be like to shoot your first feature. Maybe some things were easier than you expected and other things more difficult. And what will you take away from the experience?
In a lot of ways, it wasn't easier than I thought it was going to be, but I felt more at ease doing it than I thought I would. Like I felt comfortable and like secure in what we were doing, especially because I just felt so supported by the people that I was making it with. I felt like they really got the movie, both the cast and the crew. And so I never felt like alone and like, oh, like this is all on my shoulders to figure out. It was like we really felt like a team and it felt like we were speaking the same language. And so that was like really exciting and encouraging because it was sort of, you know, it was sort of like that kind of flow state that at times, you know, that people talk about. Like you just really get into the rhythm of making a movie, and that just felt so good. Honestly, I've been chasing that high ever since. Like it's like you so rarely get to like be on set for a month making a movie. It was such a rush. And of course, yeah, there were things that were surprising and difficult about it. I remember being surprised by just how much we had to cut out in the edit. It was kind of a relief because it was some stuff that I was like, oh, I didn't quite figure this out. Like, you know, we're trying to make this footage work, but like ultimately it doesn't, but then sometimes it hurt because it was like some bit or scene that I really loved. And you know, it was just killing your darlings. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, what we had to do in order to keep the story moving and keep it all as sort of like clear and streamlined.
And what do you hope people take away from it? And I guess perhaps playing in the context of, festivals like BFI Flair, how do you see that it does sort of sit within that broader kind of LGBTQ plus sort of cinema landscape? Perhaps, like you say, maybe overturning some taboos, some stereotypes, maybe kind of shaking up, those stories in that genre in some ways.
In terms of what people take away from it, my hope always was just that it felt relatable, that it was just really specific in a way that was like evocative of that time in life for people. And so that it could sort of take you back there and maybe give you a little bit more of like a compassionate perspective on that time than you have for it now, or you had for yourself then, you know, because it's so easy to be so hard on yourself when you're going through those very awkward transitional years. And I like the idea of making something that um, just took a more like forgiving perspective on it. And hopefully is a little bit cathartic in that way, where it's like, oh, you can revisit that stuff, which might be painful, but it's sort of in a safe, warm cocoon of a movie, you know? Um, and then in terms of just where it stands with other queer films, I'm very fortunate to have been born in a time where like we could make gay movies to begin with, and have them seen by by the public. And then also on top of that, to make stuff that shows all the variety and color like within the queer community. And so I just feel like Big Boys is just one piece of like a larger growing sort of, yeah, like tapestry of just like movies and art about queer life. And so I just hope to see more that shows us angles on this world that we've never seen before, because I just always find that so exciting.
Was it fun as well to sort of take it to all these different places, having it here in London and then obviously taking it to other film festivals? And do you ever see any difference in response or the way people kind of relate to it or connect to it?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was so fun being at BFI Flair that was the world premiere. And yeah, I couldn't believe how many people came out to see it and like just how warm the response was. And I really was so glad that, like, I felt honored that it got like they thought it was funny because I just admire the British sense of humor. And I was like, oh, okay, like we made the cut. Like they're laughing.
And do you already know what you're going to work on next? Have you already got another idea in the pipeline? What would you like to do?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm working on a couple new scripts now, and one of them is sort of almost like an inverse of Big Boys in that it's about being obsessed with somebody who hurt you in the past and sort of captivated by that person and the ways that the like the desire for closure there like can't be met at all, and so it's sort of like something you have to figure out for yourself. And so I'm definitely like, it's a movie that's still a comedy, but I think leaning more into feelings of sort of like anger and bitterness as opposed to sort of like romance and desire. And so that has been a very fun new headspace to work in.
Yeah, and it's true that even in this day and age, I just feel like too many films make everything too neat and give you these endings that are really unrealistic, whereas actually real life often doesn't give you neat answers to things.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something I'm interested in because it's so. And I think that it compounds the frustration, like when you can't get closure on things in your own life, the fact that you've seen movies where characters do get closure. So there's this feeling of like not measuring up, or it's like, oh, it's an extra feeling of failure. And so I'm definitely interested in like closing the gap and like showing that in movies the way that sometimes it can turn out in reality.
And what's your experience told you as well about kind of the ability to get an indie movie off the ground these days? Is that something that you found like was quite hard to sort of break into still? There's still barriers there, particularly what kind of film you want to make? Or do you feel like it's really opened up recently?
This movie was like just really cobbled together by like the support of like friends and family. And that was a really unique way to make it. In a way, it gave us like total freedom. Um, and I'm more embarking on the journey of like putting together a movie, an independent movie in a slightly more like official kind of way, you know, where you're like packaging it together and like taking it out on the town. And like, I'm really looking forward to seeing what that process is like, but it's very different than anything that I'm used to. And I'm just, you know, just being mindful of like trying to stay as focused on the like my own core sense of direction and like what I really want to make. Because especially as you're like emerging into the film industry, you hear just like a lot of different, and I think this is also just like the nature of it is like you're often hearing like, oh, like this kind of thing is doing well, like that kind of thing isn't doing well, like you should focus more on this, blah blah blah, and it's just like keeping your own sense of like direction and keeping that North Star I find to be so important. And luckily in like the indie world, there's a lot more understanding of that and like a sort of like prioritizing of like making something that feels new and exciting. And I'm also just very inspired by what I see other independent filmmakers doing. You know, it's like I'm always getting that jolt of energy of like, oh wow, like you can make a movie like that. Like, wow, there really are no rules. It's exciting.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Huge congrats on the movie, and I can't wait for everyone else in the UK to see Big Boys. Thanks so much.